Are you scared?
Yeah, sometimes for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But what's your relationship with that fear?
I mean, there's definitely a fear of failure to the extent that, I don't want to die. I think it's a compartmentalization thing where I'm able to separate that from what I'm feeling as I'm skating. Because it happens where mid-run, let's say I make a mistake or, maybe I hit a little rock, which is, everyone always thinks it's going to make me crash. But, you'll feel it, and you get a little spook, and I'll feel my heart rate spike. And I'll be like, wow, that was close anyway, and just move on. And you take that fear and that heart rate spike you got there, and you leave that exactly where it happened, and you have to move on.
My guest today is Owen Fox. Owen is a professional downhill skateboarder. He bombs down mountains at 70 miles an hour. So today, I have him on to talk about overcoming fear, flow states in extreme sports, and a lot more. I had a fantastic time. I got so much out of it. Hope you guys do too. But most importantly, stay safe and be well. All right, buddy. Thanks for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So some people would regard you, I think, as crazy for doing what you do. I think people just think a little bit differently towards your profession and what you do, right? You're a downhill skateboarder. You go upwards of 70 miles an hour on a skateboard with nothing but a helmet on. And some people think it's crazy. Me on the other hand, I think that maybe you've tapped into something that a lot of people that don't do what you do are searching for. What's your take on the whole thing?
I'd say that's a pretty, at least I feel that's an accurate sort of sentiment. There definitely is a popular opinion that what I do is crazy, and I don't dissuade that opinion. I see how people come to that conclusion, for the uninitiated, let's say.
Yeah.
But to me, it's far from crazy, and there is something. There's people throw around the term flow state and out of body experience and that sort of stuff, but this is the closest I've ever come to being able to tap into the flow state on command, I guess. Is every time I skate a run, I am in this world, and it's something that I have not been able to find anywhere else as consistently. And so it's almost more meditative than crazy.
Yeah, and we'll talk about flow state and how it relates to this. And some people even describe their experiences in the flow state as a spiritual experience, which is pretty crazy. But we can talk all about what you do, but why don't we actually watch what you do? So we have a video here of basically you doing one of your runs, and let's just see it for ourselves. Let's do it. Right. So where is this?
This is, won't give exact locations, but this is up in the canyons in Malibu.
Okay, cool.
So we're looking over the Pacific Ocean here.
Yeah.
And this is one of the faster runs, not only in Southern California, but in the United States.
That's unreal. Your heel is up. Your back heel is up.
Yeah.
And that position?
That position is called the tuck. It's like an aerodynamic position.
That's unreal. So they obviously don't close the road for you or anything like that. You just kind of got to dodge cars while you're going down the hill?
Essentially. I mean, more delicate than that, I guess.
Yeah.
I treat it as if I were a car in my own right or a cyclist. I stay in my lane unless I can spot through. Except
that you don't have airbags or a seatbelt. But yeah.
This is true.
That's unreal. And the turning, how do you brake on that thing?
We brake by what we call it a slide.
Right.
Normal skateboarding, it's power slide.
Yeah.
And so you push the board sideways and the wheels break traction.
Okay.
And the urethane sort of grips into the road as you slide and slows you down. It's actually incredibly effective too. If it's there's a skill curve to learning how to do it. But once you can competently slide your board, your braking power is pretty shocking.
Right. So you'll do that you'll start doing that maneuver at about 70 miles an hour?
Sometimes, depending on the road and depending on the corner, yeah.
Okay. That's crazy. And do you have any spotters or anybody like that giving you a heads up on turns or?
No, not all the time. I mean, it's a very situational thing. You know, new roads and different roads have different sort of safety precautions that you'll take.
Yeah.
But this, for example, is a road that I've skated probably 1,000 times.
Yeah.
So I know every curve,
Right.
and we'll drive up it beforehand, make sure there's no water in the road or rocks.
Right.
And then, as I said, you know, stay in your lane. Doesn't matter if there's a car coming up, you're in your lane, they're in theirs.
Yeah. But that requires a lot of confidence in your skill that, you know, you won't drift off into another lane or fall and tumble over into the other lane and
Yeah.
God forbid another car is coming.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a risk, you know, of any of those things happening or all of those things happening at once. But yeah, it is a confidence thing. And, you know, like I say all the time, I didn't start skating hills like that. You start on the little incline in front of your house or,
That's right.
or wherever.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing this probably a decade now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember the first time I ever slid a skateboard was in the parking lot of a dentist's office that had like less than 1% of gradient,
Yeah.
you know, and it was wet. I had to wait for it to rain because I couldn't break traction.
Got it.
So I started at literally the lowest consequence level you could imagine.
Right.
And you just slowly build and build and build. So as your skills build, your confidence builds, and the level of difficulty of the roads you're skating also builds.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a culture of gatekeeping, I'd say, you know, where I would never bring someone whose abilities I questioned to a road like that.
Right.
But, you know, like...
How fast are you going on that video, do you think?
In that video, we're probably averaging about 50 miles an hour.
That's pretty unbelievable. Does the risk do anything to you, positive or negatively? Do you like the risk?
A little bit.
A little bit?
A little bit, yeah. I think I used to more. I think as I've gotten a little older, I've started to be more, and I mean, you know, as my frontal lobe has come in a little bit, I like to joke. Yeah, I've definitely become a little more cautious and a little more safe.
How old are you?
23.
It is interesting, people that enter extreme sports, you know, usually don't do so at the ripe age of like 25 or 30 or something like that. You usually find that people have been doing this for a long period of time, have enough time to be able to develop the skills to then become professional like you. So that's an interesting kind of thread to pull on. It's like you go in before your frontal lobe is even completely developed. Yeah. And then you kind of develop this frontal lobe but you're in the situation where you're doing an extremely dangerous sport that is your profession. How do you navigate that? Because that's happening to you now, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know if I have a finite answer for it. I'm still trying to figure it out, you know, but, I think, I don't know. I mean, I'll put it this way. Like, I used to take a lot more risks in my training when we'd go and skate roads. Because when we compete, the roads are closed. There's protection. We're in padded suits. You know, like that's the most safe environment you can be in.
Right.
So I don't necessarily have any difficulty doing that now.
Yeah.
But training tends to be on open roads like we just saw, you know, with cars, and you have to really be on your game. That's objectively the most dangerous way to do it,
right?
The most dangerous time. And when I was 19 or 20, as I really I started skating at like a professional level, and my skills were really getting good at that point. It was like a playground, you know, and I thrived, and I almost really enjoyed the recklessness, you know.
But there's an element that you have to do that. Like, risk is an injury of reward, right? Like, you have to be okay with risk, and even doing like crazy shit sometimes in your line of work. and you're more prone and predisposed to being okay with doing that and not hesitating towards that when, you know, you're 19 years old.
Yeah.
You know, hesitation in that context leads to dire consequences. So I just wonder how you're navigating that now. And it's like, you can't, you know, you're becoming more aware of the risks, more aware of the consequences, yet you're not allowed in your line of work to be able to make any sort of hesitation towards that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think I notice it the most. I'm trying to handle it in the way where, like, I don't hesitate mid-run. My frontal lobe, let's say, is not coming into play while I'm actively skating.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like once I drop in and I'm in the middle of whatever's going on, I'm strictly on muscle memory,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just reacting. And there's no time for me to say, "Ooh, this might be a risky maneuver I'm about to make." But I am more cautious about putting myself into those situations in the first place. I might get to a road and think traffic's a little high right now. I'm good. It's a little dirty. I'm not feeling good. That's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I'm feeling off that day, I'm better now at recognizing that and not pushing myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that prevents me more and more from ending up in precarious situations.
Yeah.
But when I do end up in those situations, I don't have a problem getting out of them.
Yeah. So walk me through the process from start to finish of one of the runs.
What do you mean, like in a mental state? Or?
So no, just like start of the run, you know, you mentioned before, you kind of map it out a little bit. If you're familiar with it, great. You still it still sounds like you map it out a little bit. And then you get up there, and then what?
Yeah, I mean, the drive up is step one usually. I mean, you know, once in a while, you'll drive up the backside and just blind drop it. But that's less and less. Again, I do that less and less.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you'll drive up, and you know, it's not like there's a science to it. I'm just driving up, and most of these roads I recognize. Let's say we're taking one of my usual training hills. I know all the high consequence corners. I know where I have to make certain maneuvers. So in those places, I'm looking. Oh, there's a little gravel because it rained. You know, I know it rained 3 days ago, so we're watching for mudslides.
Mm-hmm.
Little gravel there. Maybe we'll sweep it. Maybe we'll see it's not that big a deal,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll note that.
Mm-hmm.
Keep driving up, and you just note all these little things. You note the car parked on that corner. Those people look like they may be leaving soon, or they're having a picnic. They're not going anywhere anytime
Mm-hmm.
soon.
Yeah.
But it's good to you intake a lot of information just on that drive up.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to the top, and there's no real like big secret here. Like, you get out of the car, and if it's your first run of the day, you do a little warm up stretch or something, have a sip of water, and put your helmet and gloves on, kick in.
That's all it is to you. There's no fear, there's no anxiety, there's no butterflies in your stomach, like when you're sitting up there or anything like that.
Not really. You know, maybe if I'm attempting, like I'm trying a new maneuver or I'm trying new gear,
Mm-hmm.
You'll get a little bit of sort of jitters.
Mm-hmm.
But typically, not. Like, I'm not up there doing breathing exercises trying to prepare myself for the drop.
Right.
But I used to. I as I was sort of coming up, I'd go to new hills and I'd get really freaked out, you know. And
Okay, so then what was that process like then when you would get really, really freaked out? Is it just like,
No,
hey, I
wasn't.
just got to go?
Yeah, I didn't have like a good coping mechanism for it, I'll be honest. I would just freak out a little bit and sort of psych myself out and then do it. And
Yeah.
usually once you drop the first run, you've experienced it. It's the fear of the unknown that I usually got freaked out by. You know? It's a new road. Oh, but what if it's like this? What if I crash here? What if I can't skate this?
Yeah.
And then you would do it once and, oh yeah, I can do this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But I think that went away with just experience.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've skated in more countries than I can count off the top of my head.
So
right
even
now.
when you're on a, let's say, brand new run, championship run, even if there's competition involved, do you still feel pretty confident where it's, hey, this is just another day kind of thing?
Yeah, pretty confident. The competition side sort of brings in a whole new element.
Yeah.
But also takes away elements. It's sort of just a different beast in and of itself.
Yeah.
So that I say is where I get the most sort of pre-run anxiety now, just because there are expectations and there's pressure and
Right.
there's a lot of things that come into play there.
Yeah.
But besides that, no real
Yeah.
jitters.
So you mentioned the flow state before. Are you familiar with what flow state actually is?
Maybe in a rudimentary sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure you could give me a more in-depth explanation.
A little bit more. I'm not gonna tout myself as like a flow state expert. There's flow state a lot better people at flow state than me. But generally, it's regarded as when you just become completely absorbed in any sort of task. Time flies by. Your senses and your cognitive processing is heightened. And like I mentioned before, some people even regard it at times as a spiritual experience. And why I like the concept of extreme sports so much, or why I like sports across the board, is because it takes human experience and it like maximizes it to like the 100th degree, right? Mm-hmm. And extreme sports is like a group within sports in general that does that even more so. And I think flow state is something like that, that it maximizes because the consequences are pretty dire, right? If you're not able to enter that flow state. So that's why I like extreme sports specifically so much. And that's why a lot of these flow state experts are really starting to look at extreme sports, is because the assumption is that if you ride 100-foot wave, if you go down a hill at 70 miles an hour and you don't die, chances are like you're in a flow state at some point during that, right? Do you feel that you have any of those experiences when you're headed down a hill?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely, like, I have ADHD and I've had that diagnosed since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
So I've definitely found flow state in different things, not only this. I remember, like, my parents always joke I was a Lego kid, and they would, they haven't seen me all day.
Yeah.
And I'd be in a room with nothing but a box of Legos.
Yeah.
And I could just lock in,
Yeah.
And so I've always had sort of little things that I could just lose myself in. And I think that is the flow state as far as I could tell.
Yeah.
But this is the most extreme. And a lot of people talk about skating, especially downhill, as a meditative experience, where people use it as escapism from family life, school, whatever. Because when you're doing it, you can't think about anything else. You have to be thinking about only what you're doing right there. Otherwise, you're going to get, real messed up.
Yeah.
Or you're not going to do it for very long.
Right.
And so I think that without even realizing it yet, it's a, you're in the flow state almost every time you drop in.
Yeah.
And yeah, now that it's pretty interesting to think about through that lens, because I always thought about it as it was so intense. That's how my brain was wired to think. It was so intense that I could only focus on what I was doing, or I would get really hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting is you mentioning that ADHD diagnosis and escapism and stuff like that. You hit the nail right on the head. But there is something about people that do extreme sports where you're either escaping. There's some sort of predisposition of you wanting to do what you do. And I don't think we've entirely figured that out yet. There's certain common themes that we see across individuals that do it, right? Either some sort of ADHD diagnosis where they're very, very distractible, but when they're able to find an activity where they can enter into this sort of flow state that's completely opposite of their regular state of being, as is ADHD, it becomes almost intoxicating, where you have to keep going back and back and back to it because everything else is just not that. Yeah. Which is really interesting. And then it comes back also to this fear thing. So one of the prerequisites to entering a flow state is not having a fear of failure, but a hope for success is what the experts say.
Not a fear of failure, but a hope for success.
Yeah.
That's good.
What do you think about that? It doesn't seem like you have any sort of fear when you're about to run down one of these hills.
I mean, I don't know if I could say there's no fear. I think it's always there. I think I've learned to maybe manage that or compartmentalize it a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe both.
Are you scared?
Yeah, sometimes for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But what's your relationship with that fear? You know, because so evolutionarily speaking, if something makes us scared, there's a reason. There's a reason for it to make us scared, evolutionarily talking, right? So it means that it's like a danger to our lives potentially, and we should run the opposite direction. But I think again, what makes you and extreme sport athletes so special is that you have that fear, but you have a completely different relationship with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, important to tap into, not only because I think it would benefit just the general audience to be able to figure out how to actually manage fear. But then also a lot of people are looking to how to get into these flow states, at work and their own things that they're doing. And again, one of the prerequisites for entering a flow state is that you don't necessarily fear failure. You can fear, but that fear has to have a completely different context.
Mm-hmm.
And considering the consequences of your sport, it's hard to think through not having a fear of failure.
Okay, I get what you're saying now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a fear of failure to the extent that, I don't want to die. And that is the most, that's the peak of failure. And that's not out of the question. The chance is never zero.
Right.
So I think it's a compartmentalization thing where I'm able to separate that from what I'm feeling as I'm skating. Because it happens where mid-run, let's say I make a mistake or, maybe I hit a little rock, which is, everyone always thinks that's going to make me crash. But, you'll feel it and you get a little spook and I'll feel my heart rate spike. And I'll be like, wow, that was close anyway, and just move on. And you have to, and you take that fear and that heart rate spike you got there and you leave that exactly where it happened and you have to move on. Because as soon as if I just let that consume me right then and there, I'd have to stop or I'd crash immediately. I couldn't physically continue if I let the fear of what might have just happened continue to hold on. And that's not a conscious thing I do, but as I'm thinking back now, that definitely is what happens. I had a moment training recently, a couple weeks ago, where there was some sort of hole in the road, something that happened during one of the rainstorms. There was a crack, new feature, and didn't see it, hit it, almost crashed. And if I had crashed there, I would have hit a guardrail at probably 55, 60 miles an hour.
Right.
Which would have been, it's not great for the human body.
Yeah.
and I remember I audibled, which I usually don't do too. I don't speak. I'm silent. And I audibled something and then took a deep breath and kept going. And that all happens in half a second, tenth of a second.
Yeah.
And then at the bottom, that's that sort of thing. There's a release at the bottom then. I got to the bottom and I was like, wow, that was close. That was really crazy.
Yeah. So then all that stuff that should have happened in that moment, all those thoughts, all those feelings, everything, that all happens
at the
after, at the bottom. It happens.
It happens.
But it just doesn't happen, in that moment.
Yeah.
You wait for it to, I mean, it's not even consciously that, right? I'm going to wait
and
I'll deal with this later.
There has to be a separation. Otherwise,
compartmentalization.
I mean, you'll lose your mind. Or you just couldn't do it. You couldn't do it.
And that speaks to, was that that must have been a flow state in some sense, right? Where, how are you able to compartmentalize that in a split second?
Yeah.
Subconsciously, right? It's like you're just not able to do that outside of any sort of state of being other than a flow state. Right?
Yeah, there's no way I could do that.
So like
in my day to day.
And that's something where when people do amazing things, you know, there's really no other option other than, oh wow, he must have been in some sort of elevated state of being, is basically what a flow state is, right? Mm-hmm. He must have been in some sort of elevated state of being where he's able to do what he did, what he just did. So there was a skateboarder some time ago, Danny, I forget his last name, dude, and people are gonna be very upset at me for forgetting his last name, but he tried to jump the wall of China. Danny Way, sorry. Broke his ankle, right? And then literally shattered his ankle. And then he went back and he jumped it 3 times after that. And then I think 4 weeks later, he then went on to the X Games and was doing like crazy competitions. I think he came in second, still on a shattered ankle. Yeah. And you look at that and it's, you know, from like a medical, logical perspective, it's like there's just no way that he would be able to do that, you know? I also think of, when I was in my residency training, there was this neurosurgeon and he took a patient for brain surgery. In the morning when I was there at 9 a.m., I did my thing in the hospital training. I came back the next morning at 9 a.m. I was like, oh, where's, you know, Dr. So-and-so, the neurosurgeon? He's like, he's still in the ER doing the surgery. And the surgery was like through a little hole in the skull where he was looking at and manipulating like instruments.
And he was just there.
And he was just there for 24 hours.
Wow.
And, you know, you say, wow, you know, I say, wow, when I see you do the 70 mile an hour down the hill thing, right? But at the end of the day, it's like, how do you do that? I don't know. You know, you got to be in some sort of elevated state of being, AKA a flow state, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Regarding fear, you know, Laird Hamilton, the surfer.
Yeah.
He said, you know, when he's kind of assessing things, if I don't feel fear, then I'm not assessing my situation appropriately, you know? So that just makes me think he knows fear, he understands fear, he even, you know, he feels fear, but just the relationship to it is just completely different.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's not uncommon for us to, you know, when we go on trips, we travel with a car full of guys all skate, and we roll up to all these new spots, and it's very common for us to see a road and be like, wow, this is messed up. Mm-hmm. And everyone is scared. Like the way we're talking about it is, you know, like this is terrifying. What are we about to do?
Right.
And everyone's smiling.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, this is terrifying.
Right.
Let's go.
Yeah.
And it's almost like there's a separation between what happens, and I guess this is the state, you know, but it seems so seamless. Where as soon as whatever's going on, as soon as you drop into that run, you're skating it. You know, It doesn't matter how scared you were.
Right.
And the Danny Way thing made me think. I had a buddy, one of my friends, Dexter Manning, who's on the Canadian national team. Last season, I'd say for the last third of the season, turns out he was skating on a fractured ankle, doing some of his best skating I think he's done in his career. And I mean, putting this ankle through the paces.
Yeah.
And I mean, his ankle was huge for months. I'd see him at events, and it was blown up, and we were icing it and we were compressing it so we could get it into his suit or in his shoes or whatever. And then finally, at the end of the season, he went and saw a doctor, and his doctor was like, "Oh yeah, your ankle's been broken for a while."
Wow.
And Dexter was miserable every time he wasn't on the board.
He was in pain.
Yeah, his thing was huge. It was one of the most swollen ligaments I've ever seen. It was purple, and you're giving him more ibuprofen than anyone should ever take.
Yeah.
But once he was on the board, you wouldn't know. He was able to just tune into whatever was happening. And, I mean, he was pushing limits. You know, it wasn't like he was just doing what he'd been doing. He was getting better on a broken ankle.
Right. Yeah, it speaks to the ability to just, you know, elevate your own state of being. All pain goes away in that instant. I'm sure after the run, he was like miserable again. Right?
Every time, he'd get the bomb.
Yeah.
We'd find ice. We'd tape him back up. We'd elevate it.
Right. That's incredible.
And we did this for months.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to the skill thing because I came across something that was interesting, that, you have to have an elevated level of skill too in whatever it is that you're doing as a prerequisite to going into this sort of state, this flow state, right? Like you mentioned, I'm not taking anybody up there that isn't to like the skill level where they might be able to handle this thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's like so flow, the state of flow is regarded as a state of being, just like anxiety is, just like boredom is, just like any sort of other state of being, right? But it's highly coveted because of these things, right? It's like your senses are heightened. You're so efficient. You're so, all the pain goes away, things like that. But interestingly, there is a prerequisite for skill, but that skill has to match the challenge, right? Yeah. Meaning, like, if you go down with your skill level down that 1% grade parking lot at the dentist's office, it's like you're not going to feel what you feel when you go down, at 70 miles an hour, which is really interesting. And we can bring up the chart that I came across on the screen, but it's basically like the X and Y axes are skill level and challenge. And it's like a pie chart. And in the upper right hand corner where it's like high skill, high challenge, that's when you reach the state of flow. Okay. Versus like low skill, high challenge, it's like anxious, you're freaking out, right? Yeah. It's like you're miserable.
And high skill, low challenge.
High skill, you're bored.
It doesn't.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't
exactly.
Stimulate.
So I think that speaks to in order to enter, like people want to reach flow state, it's like you got to do the work prior to being able to do that, right? And that speaks a lot to you and your skill level, right? Like you've been building it for how many years?
Probably about a decade now.
About a decade, right? So, but that makes me wonder, did you ever feel what you feel now when you weren't as skillful?
I think a little bit, but I don't know if it was. I don't know if because now I enjoy it, right? It's this thing where, as I said, it's almost like muscle memory kicks in. Yeah. And that's why you see there are tons of clips of high-level riders having crazy close call situations, and they're skating at a level that seems almost superhuman, and they're making these maneuvers and they're escaping these situations. And I guarantee you, most of them would say that it was sort of just muscle memory. Like they weren't consciously making these decisions. It was their muscle memory and their just like raw skill happening. Yeah. And so that becomes an enjoyable. I mean, obviously the close calls are not all enjoyable. They're scary, but being able to enter the flow state and have trust in yourself to like just ride that flow state all the way is very fun. And I'm sure I experienced it a little bit when I was younger, but I definitely wasn't as confident in my abilities. So maybe I would dip in and out.
Yeah.
So, you feel it and then you'd panic a little bit and come out of that state.
Yeah, yeah.
But now I can enter it. I mean,
and then you adapt as needed within that. You trust yourself in that state of being that you'll just kind of adapt if anything's thrown your way. Yeah. Versus before, you would freak out, and then you would come out of that state, and then potentially that would mess up the rest of the run. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, I remember as a kid, like I would get sort of anxious. I would get really anxious when I was a kid and I was skating, and I would want to practice each corner individually, so I knew I could do each corner. And I'd link them all together, and things like that, which is funny, and I was kind of weird in that regard. But now it's a trust in your own skill, and it's a trust in yourself, not only your skill but your decision making and really every aspect of that. Yeah. And I didn't have that, so yeah.
Yeah, incredible. I think something similar that happened with Laird Hamilton was that I forget exactly where he was. I think he might have been in Tahiti, and he was surfing, one of the biggest waves ever to be recorded. And somehow the Tahiti wave is known to be just so powerful. It's not big in size, but it's just there's just so much power coming around it just because it's really shallow where it breaks. It's about 3 feet. So again, the consequences,
dire.
Yeah, and it's all coral, right? So in Tahiti, you'll just be smashed down into the coral by an extremely powerful wave. A lot of people have died in Tahiti. But he came upon this wave. He got towed in, and then he just came upon this wave that's one of the biggest waves ever seen. And he surfed it, and while he was surfing it, he describes, and there's actually a picture out there of it, where it was so powerful, and it was kind of sucking him and pushing him in a certain direction, that he did this maneuver where he like brought his hand down to rebalance himself in the middle of surfing the wave. And it's like this maneuver had never been seen before, ever. No one had ever done it. It was just something that he did in that state to rebalance himself, finish off the wave, and surf the wave. And they ask him about it, and he's like, there was no conscious sort of thought of like, oh, I need to rebalance myself or anything like that. It was just something that he just did.
It's completely instinctual.
And he can't explain why. He just did it, right? And that was able to actually rebalance him, finish him surfing the wave. If he wouldn't have done that, then, they say that he probably would have died crashing into the reef. They wouldn't have ever found him or anything like that. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So that's kind of the stuff that, you end up doing probably.
Yeah, well, and I think that there's, like, when we talk about the flow state, I would almost even go so far to say, and this might be completely outlandish, but I think there's, like, levels to it. Where you can be in a flow state, but it sounds like where he was is what I would sort of think of as the peak, where you're almost completely operating outside of your own body.
Right.
And I can't begin to imagine what he was feeling, but based on experiences I've had like that, I would garner to say that he could tell, like you can feel your own balance as if you were marionetting a puppet.
Right.
I got to lean this way a little more. I got to put weight here.
Right.
And it's almost like you can see what you're feeling.
Right. Is that what you experienced too?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But as I said, that's like the peak. That's really, I don't think you get that very many times in your life.
I think he probably did in that near-death experience.
Yeah.
Have you had any near-death experiences, you think?
Yeah. I've had a handful.
Tell me about one. If you can, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
I mean, let's think of a good one. Let's think of one my mom's not going to have nightmares about.
No, let's think about one that your mom will have nightmares about.
She knows about most of them, thankfully. And are we thinking of one here like that involves the flow state heavily?
Sure. Whatever you want. Just throw one out.
All right, well, here's the one that doesn't actually, as probably the worst one. And this goes back to me sort of being outside of my level, and not being able to tap into that flow state.
That's
when
right.
I was about 16 or 17, I was down in North Carolina. There was a race down there held by the North Carolina Downhill organization.
Where in North Carolina?
This one was we're near Boone.
Okay.
It's like Western North Carolina.
Okay.
Western North Carolina is one of the...
I was wondering if it was Asheville.
Asheville is
love
sort of the
Asheville.
Mecca.
Oh, really?
It's
Of downhill?
It's
Really?
definitely the Mecca of downhill, at least
Love
in the
Asheville,
U.S.
man.
I've been there a bunch of times. I have a lot of friends that live there.
Cool.
But this event was held maybe an hour from there.
Mm-hmm.
And I went down. My mom came down with me. My little sister came down with me. It was like my first real big event.
Mm-hmm.
And the day before the race, I went out with I met a bunch of these guys who were locals, and a bunch of them were professionals. A bunch of them are now my very good friends.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, I was this little kid that just sort of showed up and wanted to hang out. And we were skating a road that, now is still like, it's a real road. It's a high level road.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a couple runs and was surviving. And one run made a mistake and ended up hitting the curb, which was sort of this angled, sort of like drainage curb. And it popped me up and off the side of the road, which is on the side of a cliff. And I went chest to the sky, back over, head first down through the trees. And I landed in a tree trunk that forked, and my head landed directly in between. And I was stuck upside down with my feet sticking in the air.
Oh my
head, there's a trunk on each side of my head.
Yeah.
So, 6 inches either way.
Right.
I would have died.
You had a helmet.
Yeah, but I fell 40 feet head first into this tree. You know? And I had lacerations all over my back from the tree branches. I broke my arm.
That's unbelievable.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
Still to this day, it's so vivid. And I thought I was going to die, which is like kind of a morbid thing to say, especially because I was like 16.
What do you mean? Of course, anyone thinks that you're going to die in that circumstance, man.
But I was really casual about it, which kind of freaks me out now. But I remember looking up at the sky as I was going down, and I was like, oh, wow, this is it for sure. And then the blue sky disappeared because the trees just took over as I fell.
Was that slow? Did that happen slowly?
Super slowly.
Yeah.
And yet very quickly at the same time. Like I remember every split second, but realistically that was 3 seconds, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think that was, they had to call my mom and we had to go to the hospital. And I remember I was in a neck thing for a while because I thought I broke my neck.
Yeah.
And I got super lucky. I broke my arm and I had some really nice cuts on my back. Super lucky.
Yeah.
But, I was skating a road that I really had no business skating. Or if I did have any business skating, I shouldn't have been skating it the way I was. I wanted to be skating with these guys.
The big guys, yeah.
I was trying to keep up and there was no flow state. Like every corner I was stressing and I was freaking out trying to make the maneuver.
Interesting.
And I think in the end I just overthought, the right drift that I was trying to make. And there we go.
That's crazy. There is something to say about, when you try to do things that might be a little bit outside of your skill level, that you can grow from that, right? But it's hard to make that argument in an extreme sport like what you're doing.
Well, that's absolutely the case. Like there's no way to get better in an extreme sport without pushing yourself beyond your limits. I think that the difficult thing is knowing how far to push them. And I think that's where having mentors or people who are better than you around you is really important.
Yeah.
Because the most improvement I ever made as a skater was when I started skating with guys who were World Cup racers at that time.
Yeah.
And I was skating with them every day, and they were leaps and bounds better than me.
Yeah.
But they were there and I could follow them.
Right.
And they could also coach me in a way where they're like, hey, maybe don't do that. That's a little much. Because they recognize what I'm doing and what my level is.
Yeah.
But when you're on your own, I was a kid. I was like, they're doing it. I can do it. And I had no grasp of how far above my level they were.
Yeah.
Because that's one of those things. It's difficult to understand how much better than you someone can be at something.
Yeah.
Which was the case for, you see these roads even. Like that road that we watched that run of is so much more impressive in person than the camera gives it credit. Like it's truly phenomenal to just experience, like looking at it.
Yeah.
And as a kid, you watch it and you're like, I could do that. It doesn't look that crazy. It doesn't look that, and you can't even imagine how much more intense that is.
Yeah.
So I think that's like the biggest aspect.
Yeah.
Like the mentorship and sort of doing it in a community is what makes it safe and viable.
How much do you like the community that you're in now? How much does that have anything to do with why you do what you do?
Oh, it's a huge part. It might be the biggest part, actually.
That's interesting. I told my buddy, he's a neurobehavioral guy at UCLA, Kevin Bickart, that I was coming on, and he's like, bro, talk about the community because that's going to be really important. And I'm like, community? Why? He does, something super cool that excites him. That's probably why he does it. But I asked you, and apparently
huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah. And I actually am curious why he would think, like from a medical perspective, that was an important thing to bring up. But
so as an aside, I would say that community is extremely important to overall happiness, regardless of what you do. Community is just like absolutely essential to happiness. That's it, And then if you want to start, specifying it into happiness in work, happiness in profession, happiness in hobby, right? Community is just going to be such a vital aspect to that, right? And such an important key component of it, And when you look at mental illness, one of the biggest issues that happens in the course of someone's worsening mental illness is they isolate themselves, right? And that means they're lacking any sort of community. We see it in PTSD with veterans, different things like that. So that would be my take. I'm happy to put you guys in touch so he can tell you his take. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, the community, I mean, is huge. I mean, I've been involved in it loosely for almost as long as I've been skating. You know, if I've been skating for 10 years, I've been in the community for 9, you know, that kind of thing. And I don't know, I think maybe there's something, I think that's the reason I kept coming back for a long time. I mean, I haven't been completely 100% committed to skateboarding for the whole time I've been doing it. You know, I've definitely had moments where I thought, I'm over this. I want to, you know, when I first got to college, for example, I got really into partying and that kind of thing. My freshman.
You and I both, buddy.
Yeah,
Don't worry about it.
My first year or two of school. And the thing that got me out of that was one of my very dear friends who was a couple years older than me, who was at the same school. And we skated together. He would make sure that once a week, at least, I was skating with him. He would come pick me up. I'd be super hungover. And then he'd be kicking on my dorm door. He'd be like, I have your stuff in the car, we're going.
Nice.
And he forced me. And I hated him for it at the time. You know, I was like, come on. But it was this thing, and it was this positive thing that I had.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, yeah, these guys are all my best friends. I travel with these guys, I work with these guys, I live with skaters. There's something about it. I mean, I think it's, you know, we share this like amazing passion together, which I think is an easy way to become friends. But on top of that, when you do skate with people, you also frequently share like semi-traumatic experiences or near traumatic experiences.
That's right.
Which is like, we're trauma bonding essentially. And so it creates these like, very quickly you can create very intense sort of bonds. And it's pretty incredible, which I know like maybe is not like the greatest way to make all your friends, but
no, I mean,
like
you talk about, I see a lot of the military guys, right, and the military veterans, you know, some of their best friends are guys that they served overseas with, so I can definitely see where you're coming from. And then you talk about, you know, when you guys are kind of driving up this huge hill that has potholes all over it and stuff like that, this kind of fear of it is distributed amongst everyone, maybe, instead of you having to take on that fear completely yourself. You know?
You know, you look and you're like, well, if he's doing it, I'm going to do it. And
right.
I know we're going to be fine together. We've done this a bunch of times.
Right.
And yeah, there's something about too, I can laugh it off.
Yeah.
You know, I'm scared shitless,
yeah.
but I know he is too.
Yeah.
And we've done this before. And yeah, it definitely makes it easier.
Yeah.
You know, your buddy system and something. And on top of that too, that's pretty cool. Like I travel a lot internationally, even domestically as well. And there's people who are so welcoming to me, people who I've never met, you know, who are just in that community. And I'll go sleep on someone's couch in Spain.
Yeah.
Never met them before. And they're like, a friend of so-and-so's is a friend of mine.
Nice.
Stay. And so that is that's like the wholesome side of it.
Yeah.
It's this very positive, welcoming community.
Yeah. Do you see what you do as like a occupation, a job, a hobby? What do you see what you do as?
I mean, for me right now, it's a job, and I'm trying to make it more so. Like being a professional downhill skater is sort of not a real job, if that makes sense. Like some people do it. Right now, I'm trying to do it, but there's not a ton of them. It's a pretty small sport. There's not a ton of money in it, especially right now.
I think I'm just more speaking toward, more asking you about your perspective on it. Forget about the facts. Forget about whether you're getting paid for it or not.
Oh, it's a job then. Yeah, like in my mind, it's my job.
It's your job.
And I'm doing everything I can to like have it continue to be my job.
That reality, yeah.
I mean, I train for it as if I were, you know, on a contract.
Right,
it's,
right.
You know, like some big sports company.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it used to be, I think, for me growing up, it was definitely a hobby. It was my favorite hobby, but it was a hobby, you know, and I had school and I was doing all this other stuff, and it was the fun thing that I did on the side. And as it's become more centerfold, I've realized that it's actually more fun. Like if I'm going to commit this much time to it, it's more fun if I'm better. And I want to be as good as possible. And that's now an element of the fun. So now it's, you know, I mean, now I started working out for it. I have, I'm on diets and that sort of thing. And like, I'm dieting for my hobby. No, it's my job at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just like any other sport, to be at the top and to compete at that level, it's a full-time thing.
Yeah. So you've seen it as beneficial to see it as a job rather than just a hobby?
Hugely.
Yeah.
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 And maybe, mentally, I think my perspective on it has shifted, and like what I want out of it has shifted. So for me, it's still fun, but I can see how some people just still like to do it as a hobby, and they don't like to, it's just fun for them. And I also see how that could be appealing. But for me, like, I love this, and I love working for it, and I love seeing the progress.
Yeah.
And I definitely see a lot of progress.
Yeah. What I've been noticing a lot of, and again, enough with the prerequisites about flow state, but another one is that you got to love the process, right? And it sounds so freaking cliche, but like, it's just the fact of the matter, right? Like, if you're constantly worried about that, you want to make this much money or this sort of end goal, and, the process is sort of just like a byproduct of you reaching that goal, it's just not going to happen for you, unfortunately, not at the level that you're at, right? You got to just love being out there and doing it, and the little nuances and intricacies of, bombing down a hill at 70 miles an hour. Like, you just got to love that, you got to love the risk, right? If you ask me, you got to love the fact that, you might die. Like, you got and that's another thing about that I understand about flow state is it's also dependent on the consequences, right? Like, it's hard to enter a flow state if you're doing something that you feel is meaningless, right? Or if the consequences of it are negligible, But if you're doing something where the consequences are so dire and severe, your likelihood of going into that flow state goes up like exponentially, So if you ask me, subconsciously, you probably love that.
Yeah, I think even consciously, I love that, honestly. Like a little bit,
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't know. Like, I always, my mom, I tell everyone this, like, I don't want to die.
No, you're not.
I don't like that. But there's a little bit, that it's the thrill of being that close.
Right.
Is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a rush.
So speaking of being close, so you can even see this in like that neurosurgeon, right? Or in even like the kind of stuff that I do sometimes. So sometimes, and relative to what you do is like nowhere, it doesn't compare, right? But sometimes I'll do like an injection into I'll stick a needle into someone's, spinal cord in the neck, and I have to drive down the needle within 5 millimeters of the spinal cord itself. 5 millimeters too much, and the consequences are really severe.
Yeah.
Right. And certainly there's a lot of precautions, just like you take, in regards to make sure that that's not the case. Right. But the facts are the facts. Like, I'm 5 millimeters away from this person's spinal cord. And I understand that, and I understand the consequences of that. And that's why I do my due diligence. But at the end of the day, there's something about being 5 millimeters away from that person's spinal cord that excites me.
Yeah.
Right.
When it's in your hands.
Right. It's in my hands. But at the same time, it's like, it's not just like exciting at someone else's expense. It's also excitement followed by reviewing everyone's imaging, doing all the due diligence that I have to do in order to earn the privilege of being 5 millimeters away from their spinal cord. You know what I mean? So.
Well, and that's fascinating to me too, because that takes into consideration a whole nother person involved there.
That's right.
Like for me, like, I might die, and I have my own life in my hands. And sometimes I have my friends' lives in my hands, when we're skating closely together. And,
right.
But vice versa, they have mine, and there's a trust thing there. But that's so interesting because it's so one-sided. You are in control.
Right.
That's something I can't fully relate to, like in pertaining to someone else's.
And I can't relate to your experience too. And certainly there's arguments to be said about, which one's more severe, the consequences. I would say yours is, and maybe you might say mine is, but You know, at the end of the day,
The thought of yours stresses me out tremendously.
this thought of yours stresses me out tremendously too. But unfortunately, sometimes, you know, in your line of work, accidents do occur, and that's actually how we met, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you had an accident in Turkey, and you were unfortunately knocked out cold because of it. And I hope your mom knows this, and this isn't the first time that
yeah, no, she knows this.
that she knows it. And you brought a video of it. You willfully brought the video, and you're willfully going to play it for us now.
Yeah, you know.
Awesome. So, do you want to walk us through, like, were there any circumstances that were here? Okay. Were there, like, what circumstances going into this? Was it just another run? Like, what was it?
So this was the final leg of the World Championships last year.
Okay.
We're in Turkey, I don't even want to say the province town. I'm gonna mess it up.
Okay.
So this is the round of, I believe, 16. So quarterfinals. We race heats of 4 at a time. And we're about halfway down the track here. This track is, I would say, probably if not one of the top 2, like, most intense tracks on Earth. This track is high consequence, high speed, high technical difficulty, all in one. You know, we're doing upwards of 70 miles an hour into braking zones. There's multiple high-speed braking zones. Super intense. Like, you want to talk about getting into a flow state. This was the track. The levels were out of control. And the only issue was there had been some sort of pavement failure, like, very soon before the event. So there was no time to repair it. And at one of the highest speed sections of the track, there's this seam, sort of a lipped crack. It's really not that bad. You wouldn't notice in a car, but we're doing 60 miles an hour through a corner where you make contact with it. And so all weekend it was sort of just the feature. It was all we could talk about. The track itself was crazy, but that crack, man, every run, that crack is crazy.
Yeah.
And you just sort of had to, like, point and shoot and hope, you know.
Like, were you were just dodging it constantly? Or
And you were hitting it.
You were hitting
it was across the entire road.
Okay.
But you just had to sort of pointer at it.
Right.
Take the hit, and you'd feel a bump, and then you'd have to get right back into the... And it was almost like a dividing point of the run. You know, you skate the whole run, or you skate the first half of the run, and you were like, okay, now we're going to hit the crack. And then you get through the crack, and then you'd skate the bottom.
Yeah.
But it was this whole thing in the middle.
Were you thinking a lot about it prior to the
Every
run?
time. I mean, every run.
Yeah.
Not so much before, but, like, there was no forgetting it was there.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so I'm following my buddy Alexandros. He's leading this heat right now. I'm in second place. And there was a crash up top, so we've sort of both let off the gas a little bit. We know we're going to advance through, in theory, if we stay in our current positions. There's no need to, like, get hurt. We saw places 3 and 4 crash out. And so now we're going to come in here and let's see. That's favorite. There we go.
So you're behind them.
This is me right here. Oh, that didn't work.
Oh, we kind of caught it. Let's see it again.
There we go. All right, so I'll just rewind it just so you can see. So this is the crack. You can see the line across.
Yeah.
And so you can see I turn in,
Mm-hmm.
and the board is just gone now.
Oh, wow.
It's no longer underneath me.
Oh. So it slips out from under you.
Yeah.
You just slide. Dude, head first.
Head first. Yeah.
Oh my
And then
God.
a good flip.
That's unreal.
Yeah, and I mean, it actually looks, like, to me, it looks way less intense on this video.
I'm sure.
As to how it felt.
How did it feel?
I mean, it was the second time in my life I thought I was going to die.
We talked about the
We
first.
talked about the first one.
Okay.
And again, the only thing I could think was, this is going to suck.
Really?
Like, that was the only thought I could get out.
So to me, it seems like you hit the lip, the skateboard goes out from under you, and you're just sliding on your stomach head first into the haystack.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the board just caught a lip and flipped out.
Yeah.
And the wheels were now facing up. And the crazy thing is I'm traveling so fast that I didn't feel that. I was just on the ground.
Right.
Like, it was like, I didn't feel, I had to watch the video to figure out what happened.
Right.
I just was all of a sudden, I was standing, and the next thing I know, I was on my stomach.
Right.
And I see hay,
Mm-hmm.
and then hit the
Unbelievable.
hay and out.
You were out.
Yeah, not long, maybe
Mhm.
maybe a couple seconds, two, three.
Dude, that's so dangerous. You could have snapped your spinal cord.
Yeah.
You could have done a lot of things, including snapping your spinal cord and injuring your brain dramatically.
I did manage to, I was sort of in a plank position,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I was up high enough that I caught the hay bale sort of here
Mhm.
instead of like cranial,
Mm-hmm.
caught on my face and just bounced essentially
Right.
like that.
Right.
Which was also good because I wasn't up too high where I would have gone over the bales.
Right.
I sort of caught it in objectively for how, I mean, it was going to be bad regardless, but I think I ended
Right.
up with probably the best case scenario.
Yeah.
My friend Khalil had a crash in the same corner, same weekend, and ended up actually breaking his L4 and his L5,
Oh man.
like fracturing, which
Yeah.
apparently he'd fractured like 12 years ago.
Okay.
Fractured them
Refractured them.
Um,
Unbelievable. They got to fix that lip.
yeah. Usually, like, this is a fluke. This does not
Yeah.
usually happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he and I were in the hospital together, and
Wow.
I was.
So they took you to the hospital afterwards.
Yeah, I thought I
Right.
was fine.
Mhm.
Honestly, I thought I was good.
You kind of came to.
Yeah, I mean, I came to, and I don't think I realized I'd been out. If that
Mhm.
makes sense. It
Mhm.
was a quick in and out. And
Yeah.
I thought I broke my ribs
Mm-hmm.
because the air was all knocked out of me.
Mm-hmm.
The breath came back, and sort of walking around, and I was like, okay, I think I'm okay. And I got in the medical shuttle back to the top to the rider staging area, and my friend Harry, my fellow competitor Harry, looked at me and he was like, "You need to go to the hospital." And I was like, I mean, we're in Turkey. I don't speak the language.
Right.
It's there's a lot going on. And he said my eyeballs, like my pupils, were different sizes.
Really?
I got hit so hard, and I don't know if they were looking the same direction.
Oh my god.
And I was like, "What are you talking
You were
about?"
just fine?
I'm fine, dude.
Were you ready to go back on another run?
No, I definitely was not ready to go on another run.
Okay.
But I was ready to
Alright.
like sit there and
Hang out.
hang out. He was
Yeah.
like, "You have to go to the hospital
Right.
for sure."
Right.
I was like, "Oh, if he's saying that,
Yeah.
I definitely have to go."
Yeah.
So I went, and they gave me, some scans,
Mm-hmm.
whatnot.
Everything was fine.
Seemed like it.
Yeah.
It was honestly pretty chaotic.
The
experience.
hospital?
The hospital, yeah. Because I arrived in the ambulance behind Khalil, who was going through, back,
Right.
like spinal.
He was after you though, right?
He was right before me,
Okay.
actually.
So this guy goes before you. He hits the lip. He breaks his spine.
Yeah.
His spine vertebrae. The bones around his
Yeah.
spine. And then you go and you
my
potentially
head.
have like a brain injury.
Yeah,
And then you guys just carted off separately to the hospital.
yeah, tandem. We had two ambulances right in front of each other.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, that's actually his ambulance right there. He's in that ambulance right there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he had been in the heat before me, and no one knew to what extent the crash was. We had a red flag at the top for a while,
Yeah.
but that's not that unusual.
Yeah.
And so when I crashed, the EMTs were on me in like 10 seconds.
Because they were right there.
Right there.
Tending to
And I was
your buddy
confused.
Khalil.
I was like, where'd they come from?
Wow.
And he was there. It was unusual, but it was a pretty hectic, let's say
Yeah.
20 minutes.
Yeah. That's insane. That's unbelievable.
But yeah, and I think I was like, I knew I'd hit my head. I've had concussions before,
Mm-hmm.
but I was sort of not indifferent, but I thought it was less damaging than it was,
Mm-hmm.
especially because I was there with Khalil, and I was
Mhm.
trying to make sure he was okay, and I
Yeah.
was spending a lot of time with him as, he had emergency spinal surgery that night.
It was that
It
bad.
was that bad.
Oh no, he had it done in Turkey.
Yep.
Turkey's a good place to get hair transplants. Apparently,
Yeah.
I don't know about spine surgery.
Well, I'm gonna be honest. We were in like pretty rural Turkey, and apparently they did a real good job.
Did they?
Yeah,
Nice.
and he then went
Shout out
to
rural Turkey.
Yeah, shout out rural
Yeah,
Turkey. It was
shout out rural
honestly
Turkey.
they were amazing.
Yeah.
He went to Istanbul a couple weeks later because he had to stay, to heal. before
Yeah,
the
yeah,
final.
yeah.
And he went and saw their like leading spinal surgeon.
Yeah.
And he said they did good. Like you'll be
Thumbs
fine.
up.
Yeah.
2 thumbs up.
Like he should be. I think he's actually skating already.
Oh, really?
Like back on board. Of
course he is.
Not at maybe this level right now, but
Yeah.
he's back.
Incredible.
But so I was distracted by that, and I thought I hit my head. I won't skate. I won't drink any alcohol, but
Right.
I'll take it easy and,
Right.
and do that. And then upon returning home,
You got on the flight.
got on a flight.
When was your flight in relation to the injury?
3 days later,
Right.
2 days later,
Yeah.
which sucked. There was like a lot of pressure. built
Yeah,
up,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I felt pretty bad.
Yeah.
And I got home from that, and couldn't move. I mean, my whole body. I got just whiplashed so
Right,
hard. My
right,
whole
right.
body was shot, and I sat on the couch. I remember for probably 8 days straight,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
immobile. And I was so
Just from
sore.
pain?
Just so sore, and I think the concussion starting to sink into of my brain is just, for all intents and purposes, mush. At that
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
and freshly mushed.
Yeah. And you add the jet lag on top of it, issues with sleep,
Yeah.
pressure changes in the cabin on the airplane. All those things can really factor into making that stuff a lot worse.
Yeah, I was down. I was down for the count.
Yeah.
And it was after maybe a week or two of that I ended up coming to.
Yeah,
To
see
see
me.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, my biggest concern for you, because I know your type, because I've dealt with a lot of like veterans, elite athletes, and extreme sports guys, and you're like, when can I go back? Let me know when I'm good to go. My biggest issue was balance issues with you, especially considering what you do. We saw in that first clip how you're on your tippy toes and your back leg. So that was my biggest issue, to be honest with you. Just not having this happen again, prior to the initial concussion resolving. But it seems like, we got to a point where you weren't having any symptoms, your balance was great, and you were good to go back.
Yeah, it definitely handled like pretty optimally.
Yeah.
Funny you say that about balance though, because that was like there was an issue with that for sure.
Yeah.
Because I know like I started working out in the gym before you let me go back to the board.
Yeah.
And even then, I do a lot of stuff with the Bosu balls and sort of ankle strengthening exercises, and my balance was shot.
Yeah.
I mean, I could barely do lunges for the first couple days.
Yeah.
And I built that back up in the gym. And then when I finally got greenlit to start skating, the base motions were good. My balance was solid until I got to that last 5%, skating at the high level. And I noticed that I was a little shaky in those, and maybe it was from not being on the board where the muscles had sort of weakened.
Yeah.
But I definitely noticed that as something I had to rebuild over the course of several weeks.
Yeah, man. I don't think that it could have been some issues with muscle, but we know that sensory motor balance issues are off after concussion, for a lot longer than we initially thought. We thought, hey, all symptoms resolved, balance should have resolved, but balance tends to still be a problem really far out from when someone's had a concussion. For people, for general public, it's just like, it's fine. There might be some subtle balance issues. That's fine. But for your case, it's like, no, dude, we can't,
Yeah.
We can't have subtle balance issues with you.
I noticed those. I noticed those pretty extremely.
Yeah. Well, you would only notice them in an extreme circumstance.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, really when I was pushing it.
Right.
Yeah, I think now like I'm
You're
on the
good.
straight and narrow. I'm good now.
All right.
But
Awesome.
Yeah.
But what about like mentally going back to things in terms of going back to the sport, gnarly crash, any hesitancy out there or no?
not really. Not in regards to the crash. I'm annoyed. I'd say there's annoyance at the fact that like my off-season training was held off for so many weeks because of that.
Yeah.
And I had such a heavy setback.
Yeah.
Because the weekend before that Turkey race, I won the last race in the U.S. National Championships, which is like the biggest race in North America that year. So I was coming off like an all-time high.
Right.
And that was a huge win for me.
Right.
Left that race, got on the plane, went to Turkey, smoked myself. And so it was really like from sky highs to extreme lows.
Yeah.
So that I think has been the biggest shift, is even with all the training I've done and all the rehab I've done, I'm definitely not exactly in the place where I was that weekend before when I won that race.
Physically, you think?
Yeah, physically. And I don't think, like, not to say and maybe even mentally too, and not that I'm worse, but it's different, you know? Like, I didn't just keep that linear path going. I had a huge setback.
Sure.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I think this weekend this upcoming trip, and we're racing in the Philippines and for the World Championships. That's going to be
awesome.
It's going to be awesome. It's the first race of the season though. So it's going to be
like a litmus test.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have no idea how I'm going to do on track. I haven't been in an environment with this many competitive people in probably 4 months.
Yeah. We'll see how it goes. I think you just approach it how you would anything else, right? There was a story about Rory McIlroy. He had I forget exactly, you know who Rory McIlroy is, the golfer, the professional golfer. Had a disaster happen at like one of the Grand Slams or something like that, where he was in first and then somehow just completely botched like the last few holes and ended up in 15th. And then he had another Grand Slam 4 weeks later, and he won the Grand Slam 4 weeks later. And like that kind of bounce back is absolutely incredible, right? Someone that could go from this, absolutely devastating, embarrassing moment, in national TV at the Grand Slam, completely collapsing in front of everybody, to then 4 weeks later winning it, Yeah,
there's something about that. I'm assuming he had a full sort of reassessment moment there.
You got to think about, I don't know what he did. Honestly, I wish we had some insight, but he did something.
Yeah.
Right? And I tend to think about it. You just got to go back to the basics, go back to, what it is that you know how to do, and just stick to that. Yeah. Not think too much about it.
There's no secret sauce. There's no like shortcut.
I think there is a secret sauce, and you got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You clearly got a secret sauce, man.
I got something.
Yeah. You're definitely a special dude for sure.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
I think it'll be, regardless of how this race goes, the season's going to be good. I've put a lot of work in, and there's a nice chunk of space after this race before the rest of the season.
Yeah.
Probably of another 3 months.
Okay.
So this is sort of like, we usually don't race in February.
Yeah.
But we're racing in the tropics, and it was
Nice.
a scheduling sort of thing, from my understanding.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a bonus. Because usually I'd still be in off season. I wouldn't get to race for another 3 months.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a little blessing that I get this in the middle of my training regime, this high intensity weekend, racing the best of the best, and then right back to
the drawing board.
To drawing board, and prep for like the real bulk of the season.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm trying to look at it, as it's almost like a little gift.
Yeah. Positive outlook's is gonna be key to your success for sure. All right, man. Thanks so much for coming on, dude.
Thank you for having me.
This was awesome.
This was a blast.
Thanks so much. I really, really appreciate it. I think we got some really awesome insight from you. Also, you have a documentary that just got put out about you. I watched it last night. It's super short, but really amazing. I think it was like 14 and a half minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
It was excellent. Kind of follows you along in doing what you do, which is incredible. It's amazing. And it gives like really good insight into it. It's done super well. I really enjoyed it. I'd encourage everyone to check it out.
Yeah.
Where can people find it? Can you give some more information on that?
It's on YouTube. It'll be called The Perfect Line. And I believe the YouTube channel it's on right now is Spencer Shipman, who's the kid who directed it. But if you just look up The Perfect Line, Owen Fox, it'll be right there.
Awesome.
And that the idea was that with that was sort of to create a piece that anyone who was not involved in the sport could watch and sort of get a feel for like the authentic experience of being involved. I think there's usually a separation in content like that, where content that is made for the masses tends to be disingenuous to the identity of the sport at the most core level.
Yeah.
And the most core content tends to never make it to, you know, the public eye because it's so sort of niche and obscure.
Yeah.
So I tried to do something along the lines of a bridge.
Yeah.
And so far, I think it's done all right.
Yeah. Authenticity is key when you talk about content, you know? Yeah. And also the sport, you know, I know it's growing in popularity. I can see why, you know, it's super exciting to watch.
Yeah.
You know, not only because of the dire consequences that we kept talking about, but also, you know, the skill level that it takes to do what you do is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So I would encourage anyone to just check out the sport. It's an awesome sport.
Yeah, no, it's huge. Our racing series are picking up right now, and we're trying to get picked up for, you know, television broadcast. Not that that's really my wheelhouse, but that's sort of the direction we're heading.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, you know, if you're into racing sports at all,
yeah.
You know,
do y'all do any in California?
Right now we don't have any races in California.
All right.
They're like some on the tables. We used to. They sort of ebb and flow. We race in Washington a lot.
Yeah, I'd love to check one out. You'll have to invite me
if
you're ever like West Coast or anything like that.
I will
gotta let
definitely
me know for sure.
Yeah.
I'll also lend my medical expertise.
Yeah,
if it's required. Thanks so much, buddy. It was an honor. It was a pleasure. Again, I think what you do is amazing. I think you are amazing, and I think your sport is amazing. I think it keeps growing. I hope it keeps growing in popularity. I hope everyone else got something out of this because I got a lot out of it, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Everybody, make sure you check out the documentary, Perfect Line, but most importantly, stay safe, be well. Cool. Thank you, bro.
Thank you.